Hey, welcome back to You Shoulda Just Went to a Salon, honey. Just kidding. Although not really. Anyway, I would like 5 to 10 minutes of your time today to talk about The Voice of Fire by Barrett Newman in conversations that don't help with friends or making... in conversations that don't help with making friends or trivia. In 1990, the National Gallery of Canada purchased The Voice of Fire by Barrett Newman, pictured here, for $1.76 million. And this kind of pissed some people off at the time because they were like, that's a lot of money. Adjusted for inflation, it's about $2.76 million, so it's like not that much of a difference. It's like a $3 million painting. But because the government bought it with taxpayer money and the fact that it's such a simplistic design really pissed a lot of people off. So the common refrain, or like what people were saying around that time about the painting, was my child could do that, which is an ongoing theme, I guess, with people when they talk about abstract expressionism. So I would just like to get into why that's not true, why your child could not paint that, and why The Voice of Fire is one of the most iconic paintings of all time. And you know what? The Voice of Fire is an iconic Canadian piece of art. It has nothing to do with Group 7 or Emily Carr. It's not even by a Canadian artist, but we own it now, bitch. And it is everything. So a big thing with buying public art from, if a national gallery purchases art, a lot of people have very little literacy regarding how that works or like what benefit that is to the economy. So just to break it down, The Voice of Fire was purchased at $1.76 million. It's now estimated to be about $40 to $50 million, which means it's had a 1,500% increase in value since it was purchased. So it was definitely not a loss. And also, as of 2019, the American Endowment for the Arts Fund, I think that's what they're called, they released a study that said that public art and institutions contribute over $700 billion to the American economy. So obviously Canada doesn't have, you know what I mean? We're not going to make that much money off art, but it is still like public art and public institutions are the tea, especially American abstract expressionism, which is what The Voice of Fire is, and we're going to get into that right now. Barrett Newman, the author of the painting, he was born in 1905 in New York City, and his parents were Jewish immigrants, and they had set up a textile manufacturing business, like a cute little shop where they manufactured textiles. So Barrett worked with that, and he was always a very artistic kid, and he was very like philosophical, and he was always down for like existential discussions, and he just really was like obsessed with art and obsessed with the idea of the new America. So Barrett went to school, he studied philosophy, and then he wanted to paint, but he didn't start painting yet, so he became a substitute teacher, and he was doing that into his 30s when he met his wife Anna Lee Greenhouse. And Anna Lee would go on to support him for years and years and years. At some point, we'll talk about it in a second, she actually was like, stop teaching, I'm going to pay for everything because you are a M.F. genius, honey. But in the early 30s, Barrett was just kind of like writing about the new art, and he was a critic, and he was making his own art, but he would destroy those later when he came up with his iconic style, which would be seen in The Voice of Fire, and some of his other sculptures that had little zips or whatever in them, which I'll talk about. So in the 1930s, when Barrett started doing art and when he got into art, a really important thing that a lot of about American Expressionism is that it was sponsored by the government. So they had the New Deal and the Second New Deal, which are two iconic pieces of American political history. But inside the New Deal and the Second New Deal, there was a lot of funding for the arts. And that would tie over 10,000 immigrant artists that came to America to build sculptures and murals and paint buildings, design architecture, and create what would be the new America. So during that time, these were called the émigré artists. So this would be people like Rothko and Pollock and other abstract expressionists. And they were tasked with creating like this new American art. And even though all this money was being spent on them, as of today, if you compound it, how much money that has contributed to the American economy, to the global economy, it's like tens of trillions, if not quadrillions of dollars that this art movement created or Do you know what I mean? It was the fuel for the fire for this movement to keep happening. So in the 1930s, there was the rise of Nazism, there was Italian fascism, a lot of violent racism, the Soviets, like a lot of very big political things were happening in Europe and Central Asia. So during this time, a lot of people came to America to escape that before World War II. World War II didn't start until 1939, but between 1930, there was the collapse of the stock market. And then, so during this time, there's all these artists coming over. So now they're being paid to do it, and they're creating art like this. So if you think in your mind, like, what is great art? What is art? You think of like the Renaissance, or you think of like the Baroque, the French Baroque, or like English countryside painting. And even though there's like all kinds of great art happening all over the place, it's generally like most people, if you tell them to think about like what is great art, that's kind of what it is. And if someone in America or someone in Canada or not England, somewhere else is painting this lovely portrait, or not portrait, but like a landscape, like a John Constable sort of beautiful British landscape, that's not really like your style. You're appropriating or you're paying homage to a different style. So for American art, abstract expressionists such as Pollock, Rothko, and Mr. Newman, that is what great American art is. It's like if you look at like the Vietnam Memorial, or do you know what I mean, the Chrysler Building, or all of these great iconic pieces of American architecture and art, that all came from this period. So it's such a rich period. Barrett Newman didn't have a lot of success for most of his life, but he got to have a really nice ride into the sunset, because his wife Anna Lee, like I said, they met in 1934. They got married, and she really pushed him to do his art. He had his first major sale in 1948, and at that point in time, Anna Lee was like, quit teaching, quit lecturing, quit writing, just do your painting, make us millions of dollars. And in 1952, he sold his first record-setting painting, which was $1.5 million that he got for that in 1952. So that was a lot of money. He just went on to be a professional painter after that. In 1967, a man named Buckminster Fuller, he was an American eccentric inventor, and he designed the American Expo of 1967, the American Pavilion, which was designed, it looks like the Epcot Center. And in it, he decorated it with Barrett Newman's Voice of Fire. So the Voice of Fire was designed for the Epcot Center, and the idea was man in this new world of technology. And Expo 67 is a really great, interesting topic by itself. There's a commercial dedicated to it in Canada about the renovations of Montreal. And there's Habitat 67. I can put a picture up of that. Expo 67 was one for the history books. So the Voice of Fire was in that. And that was a big deal for Barrett Newman. But Barrett Newman, the Voice of Fire is not one of his major iconic works. He has a lot more famous works, but this one is very famous or important to Canadians as a very expensive piece in the possession of the Gallery of Canada. Barrett Newman's works have set various records throughout time. His works generally go between $40 to $80 million. And are in the top, he has multiple pieces in the top 100 most expensive art pieces of all time. So Barrett actually died in 1970 of a heart attack. He was pretty young. I think he was 1905, 65, 70. Died in 1970, whatever. But he died. So in 1987, the National Gallery of Canada contacted his wife, Anna Lee, his widow, and asked her if they could borrow the painting for a temporary exhibit, and it was so good that they decided to buy it in 1990, where the controversy started. And then here we are. So now I'll just talk about the actual piece of art. So the Barrett Newman Voice of Fire is 213 centimeters tall, which I think is about 5.5 meters. It's 93 centimeters wide, which would be about 2.5 meters wide. So it's a very large piece of work. It is absolutely stunning. It sits in the National Gallery of Canada, and it's kind of its own room. And there's one of his sculptures is there, but there's very little distraction. It's kind of the centerpiece of the room. And I had the privilege of studying art history in Ottawa, so I got to be at the gallery a lot of time, and I got to actually sit inside the Voice of Fire. Or not sit inside, I got to sit in front of the Voice of Fire. And it is a transcendent experience. It's such a cool painting. It's very, very, very cool. So it is a block of blue, red, and blue. But when you sit on the bench and you look at the painting, it moves like fire. So it's very, very cool because the color is super, super saturated. It's done with acrylic, and it is just like really, really, really cool. So it really, like, anyone that ever said my child could do that, like, no, your kid could not do that, because this piece of art is everything. Like, it's so cool. It's so cool. People think about, like, what is, like, the meaning of the painting. I don't think that there is a meaning of the painting. It has a lot to do with technology, the new age of man, the direction we're moving forward to, because when you think about American abstract expressionism, American art, you contrast it against the communist art, the socialist art that was happening at the same time. Like if you look at Diego Rivera, or if you look at Pablo Picasso in Paris, even though their works were very abstract or different or artsy, there was still a message behind them that was very political, and it was very, if you're educated on the art, you're supposed to feel a certain thing about the art when you look at it. But great abstract expressionism in American art is about not being told what to feel when you look at the painting, to look at it and just feel good when you see it, because you're free to make the decision yourself. And that is what makes that art so effing good, honey. Yeah, that's good. Thank you so much for listening to me today, and I hope you guys have a great day, and please like, comment, and subscribe. Bye!